Welcome to episode 5 of the Weight Watchers show. My name's Terry Corby of Good Business Pays. So those of you that have been here before know that we are the organization that campaigns for faster payment to small businesses. And today we're talking about e-invoicing. Why are we talking about e-invoicing? Because the government has a big consultation out right now. There are only a couple of weeks for you to get your opinions in, but I know that they want to hear your opinions. And so today we've got some of the experts from the world of e-invoicing in to tell you all about it and what they want to hear from you. We will have Rachel Stirrat, who is leading external engagement, stakeholder engagement for HMRC. Then from the world of business, we've got Leith, who runs the Purchase2Pay Network, which is quite a huge amount of big businesses actually part of that network. So we'll bring the voice of business in, but also importantly is leading something called the e-Invoicing Advocacy Lab. So we'll hear a little bit about that as well. And then something that joins kind of business and regulation and government together, which is the world of accounting software. We've got Joel Gladwin with us from public policy at Intuit, which of course owns QuickBooks, to bring that connection in between small business and what they need to do. And I'm going to first, I was going to ask Rachel to start, but I'm going to ask Ellen to start with a difficult question, perhaps, or an easy one. Give us the definition of what is e-invoicing, just so that we all start in the same place, because I know that I was sending my invoices out through QuickBooks and thought I was doing e-invoicing, but I'm wrong. So tell us what e-invoicing is.
Well, I guess I'll kind of start the conversation with what e-invoicing is not. And an e-invoice is not a PDF. There is some people who believe that if they send simply a PDF on an email and send it across, that because it's done electronically is therefore an e-invoice. But what that is lacking is the kind of analytics that you're able to have if you do use true e-invoicing. So if you're using something like a PDF, for example, or if you're still using a very, very manual process and using paper, that's something which is in an unstructured format. So what you need to be doing is using something electronically which is touchless. So you're not having that human impact on your processing, and you're going end to end using an electronic system. And the beauty of that is that you're then able to draw down information all the way across and along your supply chain about the kind of businesses and supply chain that you are dealing with. But there's more complexity to that. But in a nutshell, that's what an e-invoicing is.
Okay, and a second question related to that, because I have a view that, it's an important thing, but in and of itself, it won't speed things up. We talk about faster payment. So, for instance, virtual cards have been around for quite a long time, and they were meant to speed up and probably do speed up payment to smaller businesses and suppliers. But they haven't been taken up by smaller businesses, either through cost or because they haven't been engaged. So how will e-invoicing be different, do you think?
Well, I think it's partly it's about communication and making sure that businesses, larger businesses and small businesses truly understand the benefits to be gained by e-invoicing. Look, if you're a small business, you're not necessarily looking at great detail at those processes. What you're concerned with is what is your core business, and so I think it sort of, to some extent, it depends on larger businesses to speak to their smaller suppliers and help to communicate the benefits to be had by e-invoicing, because otherwise it just becomes something which perhaps is a burden. They think, well, do you know what? I don't need to necessarily think about this extra thing. I'm too busy maintaining my small business. I haven't got time to think about this. So I think it's about making sure that communication piece is right, and so that everybody understands the benefits to be gained by using it. And you know, when those benefits are manifold, and to some degree, because of the regulations which are in place, and because, you know, if you're a smaller supplier, you probably will find yourself along the supply chain of larger businesses. If you are having to conduct business globally, then I think increasingly you're going to have to do that using e-invoicing, because it's been mandated in so many countries. And even, you know, if you look at some of the regulations which are in place here in the UK, or certainly going to be in place in the UK, e-invoicing is the way that the trajectory is going. That's the route of travel, is going towards using e-invoicing, because it becomes something that you can be more compliant if you are using. And perhaps we'll go on to that a little bit further.
Well, thanks for that. That's a brilliant introduction, actually, because welcome, Rachel. Thanks for persevering there. You're now with us. Can you hear us okay? And make sure we can hear you. All right.
I can hear you fine, and thank you for your patience. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. So what I've heard so far is e-invoicing is going to be good for us, and maybe it'll be mandated because that's the way of travel. And so tell us where the UK government, if you can, I know you don't speak with the government, obviously, where does it stand on e-invoicing at the moment? And is that the direction of travel? And therefore, what would be the point of having a consultation? And I know a lot of questions in there, but tell us all about it. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Stirrat. I am from HMRC and I'm part of the e-invoicing policy team. As some of you may be aware, we currently have a consultation out, which is a joint consultation between HMRC and the Department for Business and Trade. So it's not our standard practice to do joint consultations. It's actually quite a lot of extra admin for us. But for this area, our view and our minister's view, much more importantly, was that we are looking at e-invoicing through multiple lenses. So we are, of course, I'm here from HMRC. We are very interested in how increased use of e-invoicing could help businesses with their tax compliance, and how it could help us with our own work to, identify the businesses which we need to have a little bit more of a look at, and enable us to not bother the businesses who are doing everything they should be doing. But we're also, as a government, really interested in e-invoices' potential to drive productivity. And there are several, I think the best way to put it at this stage is that there are several hypotheses that we are testing. So we are looking at whether e-invoicing helps to improve productivity by automating tasks which can often be manual and slow and quite time consuming. So that's things like the data entry of invoice information. It's things like removing the risk of error simply due to misentering data. There's also some evidence that increased use of e-invoicing can speed up payment cycles. We think this might be happening because invoices aren't getting lost. They're not going to the wrong inbox. The person you send the invoice to isn't on holiday. It's also much harder to lose the invoice in a badly managed inbox if it's being sent by email, or a badly managed post room if it's being sent by post, if it's being sent by an electronic invoice. So it's both speeds up payments where there's slow payment due to just, challenges of admin. It also removes that excuse if you want to pay late and you don't really want to admit that you're paying late. So these are all things we're looking at. The consultation is live at the moment. It closes on the 7th of May. And if you have an interest in this area, I'd really encourage you to respond. We want to hear from across the whole economy, and it's really important that we hear from businesses in all sectors and of all sizes. I've had a few people say to me, "Oh, but we're quite small, we wouldn't want to hear from you." And my answer is, no, I want to hear from you because you're quite small, because Otherwise, I don't not get to hear what the challenges and hopes and options are for smaller businesses. So at the moment, no decisions have been made on the future UK direction of travel. At the moment in the UK, you can use e-invoicing, but you don't have to. And we don't have a sort of set standards for a regime for e-invoicing. So the options on the table range from, I mean, there is always a do nothing option. I don't think that's where ministers are going, but that's within their set of options. They could decide that we want to put better regulation, better standards around e-invoicing. So if you use e-invoicing, you can be confident that it's a good product, that it's going to talk to everyone else. There are options for having some form of e-invoicing mandate. That could be everyone who's VAT registered has to use e-invoicing. That could be linked to certain business sizes. In some countries, we've seen mandates brought in, for example, in public procurement. So it's only business to government supplies that have to use e-invoicing, and other supplies, you have options. And we're also looking at questions of whether e-invoices could be effectively copied to HMRC, so that we would have better visibility of kind of what's going on in the economy and better data on which to make our decisions about which businesses we raise investigations into. We know at the moment we raise quite a lot of investigations into fully compliant businesses, which isn't a great use of our time. It's also quite stressful for the businesses involved. So if we can get better at our targeting, that should be a win-win for everyone. Our ministers are really enthusiastic about the potential of e-invoicing, and you know, it's not my job, and certainly not what I'm going to do, to sort of look into a crystal ball and say, and I think this is what they're going to decide. That's not up to me as an official. My job is to advise. But what we want from the consultation is to make sure we've got a really wide range of views and responses from a wide range of people with different interests and different concerns, so that we can help ministers understand the pros, the cons, the options, and they can make an informed decision. And that's really where we are at the moment. We are, of course, looking at international examples, what's going on across the world, what we can learn from other countries, and how UK businesses are affected by existing mandates, so that we can think about things like how any UK regime would interact with international regimes to try and create a smooth, what am I trying to say? To try and ensure that e-invoicing doesn't create a new set of barriers to international business. So I think that answers your questions, Terry.
Yeah, there's so much richness between what you and Ellen have said there. I would encourage, got quite a few people watching at the moment, and if you've got a question that is prompted by anything that anyone says, just pop it in the chat and we'll get it into the show here live, because you'll be thinking about your consultation feedback, which is very, very important that you get your views in here. I'm sort of excited by the idea that it's going to take away all the excuses for non-payment, because we have a bingo card of excuses and I can cross them off as we go and see if e-invoicing will do each of those. And one question I had, Rachel, about HMRC's involvement. Obviously DBT and HMRC are running this consultation together. What is, apart from the making sure that investigations are targeted, what are the other interests of HMRC in the promotion of, or adoption of, I should say, e-invoicing?
So this is an anecdote, but I think it's quite an interesting one. We, at the moment, when our officers go into a business to do a VAT assessment, they're often presented with a bin bag of invoices, and I hear very similar stories from accountants that I talk to. It's always bin bags, apparently. One of our officers went into a business that was using completely e-invoicing. He had allocated a day of his work for this work. By 10 a.m. he was done and wondering what on earth he tells his manager, because instead of sort of digging through a bag, working through quite slowly, manually going through all the papers. All of the information was just there and available. And this is something which, for us, it means we can become much more efficient if we are able to get through that information, more effectively. There are also things being done in other tax authorities looking at using e-invoicing information so that they can improve themselves from a sort of more customer service perspective. So that could be using the information we're getting from e-invoicing to identify that, something looks a bit odd, and do we need to send, we call them nudge letters, a sort of, do you want to have a look at this again before you make any declarations to us, so that taxpayers get that heads up that it's worth a second look. There are countries which have looked at things like pre-filled VAT returns, so offering businesses a sort of, here's our estimate of what your VAT return should look like. Do you want to edit it? These aren't things we would necessarily do, but they're doors it opens. And so we are currently doing quite a lot of work internally, as well as our external work, to understand actually what could we do differently and better if e-invoicing was in use. And if we were getting data from e-invoicing, which bits of data would we actually need, and how much would it actually help us, because we shouldn't be asking for data that we don't need, as well as all the things that I think we, any government department asking for data should be doing around how do we store this data, how do we keep it safe, because obviously invoicing data is very commercially sensitive to businesses, and so making sure that we have those things in place is really important. So that's the sort of work we're doing, because this is what we're considering, and this is what we'll be trying to say to ministers, here are the options. That doesn't mean that we haven't made decisions. We don't know what the answers are yet, which I've done a few of these sorts of things where a lot of questions get asked, and I have to say, we don't know yet. We're just not that far down the line. But I think it's great that we're able to be really open about where we are in this process and get views early, so that we can do our policy development with the understanding of kind of what challenges people see and what opportunities people see, and we can hopefully address both as we move forward.
Good stuff. Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions coming in, so for those people asking questions, don't worry about it, we're going to get those. I want to ask Joel a question, because the let's call it the accounting software area, that is the big link between everything we've been talking about in big businesses and those 5 million or whatever they are smaller businesses, many of whom will use accounting software like QuickBooks, the one that Intuit own. Is this sort of accounting software world ready for this change, Joel, do you think? And back to that question of engagement, because you're forever, of course, engaging small business customers, how would you get small businesses engaged with this?
Thanks, Terry. So one of the things I would say is, and first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and to echo sort of what Ellen and Rachel have said. There's the way that e-invoicing sort of can break down some of the sort of the friction points in the invoicing process is certainly something that can benefit small businesses. From the software providers' perspective, yes, we're ready to start building in this space. Given that mandates are coming in across the world, in many of the markets that we already operate as a global business, we are already building towards certain mandates and standards. So places like in Asia Pacific, where they're a lot more advanced, and then looking at the European Union as well, with sort of the EU's e-invoicing mandate coming in 2030 to 2035. As well as Latin America as well. So as a global business, we are already building out e-invoicing capabilities in those markets, and that's where, like, sort of from a benefit to a small business perspective, yes, it can help with sort of the times of late payments, as well as sort of the business administration costs as well. But I think like the most compelling argument for the need for the UK to start moving on the e-invoicing mandate is actually from an international trade perspective. Given the sort of small businesses, many of our customers are small businesses. There's 0 to 9 employees, so on the micro business scale. Many of them are in supply chains, global supply chains with larger businesses. And given that the mandates are coming in globally, they're actually going to need to be able to have e-invoicing capabilities in order to continue to engage with their international counterparts and to grow. Given that sort of exports are a major priority, boosting exports is a major priority of this government. One of the things that's going to be necessary is to ensure that they're still in those supply chains. But one of the things I would say is that from an engineering perspective, given that our experience with making tax digital and sort of some of the delays that we've seen from that over the last 10 years, one of the things that we as the market, private market participants building these capabilities really would like from government is clarity on timescales, because it's extremely costly when timescales slip. And it's ensuring that sort of those are set in concrete will be super important to give us the confidence to invest in building the great products that can help with all of these with some of these solutions for small businesses. I think the other thing to go on with, given that sort of Rachel built on it as well, which was the dual aspect of helping with sort of the tax compliance aspect from HMRC, but then also from the DBT perspective, which is boosting digital adoption. And actually, like, this is where I think e-invoicing is the next logical step to making tax digital, because now, after a couple of weeks ago, we finally got the confirmation that Making Tax Digital will be fully rolled out for income tax and self-assessment in April 2026. That will then mean that a lot of the coverage of the market will be using software like QuickBooks, and therefore it makes it easier for a potential e-invoicing mandate to come in at a future date, because of that broad market coverage of people, of small businesses using software, that will make it a lot easier for a potential mandate to be rolled in after Making Tax Digital has been completed.
And can I ask, Joel, for any markets where you've effectively switched e-invoicing on around the world, have you been able to quantify or see these kind of benefits for small businesses where it is actually implemented?
I would say so. From going back to some of the points that I said, from like a payment times perspective, less so, mainly because sort of some of the technological solutions that we already have, such as pay enabled, you'll know, Terry, using QuickBooks pay enabled invoices, so a link that providing them with a link to either PayPal or Go Cardless, which enables instant payments, or the automatic reminders, AI enabled automatic reminders, and then also even like sort of the AI enabled sort of drafting of invoice chasers as well. Speaking to our customers, those three things have been extremely important in driving down the time of payments. So that's we've got the technological solutions at the moment. I think like one of the things that will drive down payment times further, and it's really important, is the need for legislation that changes the culture of late payments. So on the technology is one part of the solution, but it's not going to be the silver bullet that stops late payments. There needs to be changes in legislation that drives out the culture of late payments in the UK.
Yeah, so we come back to the age-old story, and I'm going to come to some of the questions. I actually got a bunch of very good questions from Alex, as you would expect. But Ellen, I'm going to start with you on this one, because you're the closest perhaps to the big business world that we have here. And so Alex was asking about e-invoicing, brilliant idea, but it still needs things like good governance to match the invoice with I don't know, a purchase order of some kind. It needs governance with an ERP system that works. So are big businesses happy to allow e-invoicing to come in and pay all its invoices straight away without having over complex governance systems and lots of expensive ERP modifications in, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the fact is that many of large businesses are already using e-invoicing to some extent. So it's not that it's something entirely new. Large businesses already use e-invoicing, but you're right. Organizations have to look at their existing processes, and there will be some degree of change management involved for those businesses who are not currently using e-invoicing. But I think it's a very rare thing these days to come across a large business where there are no existing elements of automation. I mean, you know, historically, some of the larger businesses, which were, you might call them more cash rich, could be perhaps insurance businesses, for example, or banking, they didn't necessarily have the levels of automation that you might see in other industries because they didn't necessarily think of it, didn't think they needed to. However, that environment is changing these days because organizations know that if they have a more manual process, they're at risk. You know, there's nothing to stop another innovative business similar to them coming up and sweeping away their business overnight. And that can happen. And to some extent, an e-invoice, if an organization is very, very digitally aware, to some extent, it reflects the culture of that organization. You know, they're forward thinking, they're looking to grow, they're looking for investment, and they're looking for surety and confidence. And if you can get that level of confidence and surety within an organization, then you're able to get investors to believe in you. And for sure, that also means paying your suppliers on time. If you've got all of these kind of red flags, you know, are you digital? No, you're not. Do you pay your suppliers on time? No. Are you compliant? No. Can you trade, therefore, globally? Probably not, and increasingly not. You know, we're looking at more than 90 countries already either mandated the use of e-invoicing or about to. That's a significant area of the globe that have seen the light, I guess, and they wouldn't be doing it unless it was something that they thought gave them a competitive advantage. And do we want the UK to be at a competitive disadvantage? I mean, no, we don't. You know, so there are organizations, as I say, who are already using it, and I believe that will only continue. Yes, I think that you need to be aware of who to include in the organization. You need to get your books in order and your processes in order, and certainly your data in order. But an e-invoicing implementation program can actually give you the opportunity to look closely at your processes and to know your suppliers even better, and to say, okay, who are the small businesses within our supply chain, and really understand who they are and what their needs are. So it can actually provide that impetus that you might not otherwise have thought of until, I don't know, sometime later down the line. So, and I think once a larger business knows the suppliers more, it actually opens the door to other opportunities as well, like innovation. The more you know your suppliers, obviously you know what their plans are and how you might, as a larger business, tie into that as well. But if you're a large business who's paying their suppliers late or not treating them in the way that they should be treated, you're surely not going to be the person that they turn to with their innovative ideas.
Well, yeah, getting the data right and knowing your suppliers is very topical, because We're Good Business Pays have just released some research. We did interview 513 AP professionals in the largest companies in the UK and asked them whether the supplier data on their current system was correct. 63% of them said a quarter of it was wrong or not reliable, and 24% said half or more was not reliable. And in big companies, that's a lot of suppliers. So there is going to need to be, as e-invoicing comes in, quite a lot of spend, I'm thinking, in terms of technology to get the systems right. Who pays for the change, right? So does the buyer pay, or does the seller pay? Does the big company pay? Does the small company pay for any changes needed?
I mean, sometimes it's about ownership as well, Terry. You know, you talked about not knowing the suppliers within your supply chain, and I think that sometimes that can be as a result of disconnect within the business. So it's not necessarily about spending more money. It's looking at perhaps it's a very large business. Perhaps you do need to bring in some consultants to help you get a proper vision of what's going on within your organization. But sometimes it's about a disconnect, say, between procurement and finance. You know, you might be operating a no PO, no pay policy, and you know there are many positives to that, and most people would advocate for that. There are some exceptions to that, and I think that it can't necessarily be a black and white rule. However, in a lot of organizations, you know, that it can be owned by the AP department. In others, that sort of policy can be governed by procurement, and I think sometimes there's a disconnect between. And I think that the more organizations are able to use business partnering or to collaborate properly across the business, they get a better visibility. Get those processes right, and then add the layer of e-invoicing, you're able to really get that visibility that you would never get if you were just using a PDF invoice, if you were just using manual invoice. I mean, whose desk has it landed on? You know, you sent it to somebody? I think you mentioned earlier, you sent it to somebody, they're on holiday. You know, you're able to put those policies within the invoicing process that enables it to be compliant, to get delivered on time, supplier gets paid, let alone really getting the rich data from that as well about what's happening in your supply chain. And we might touch on it a little bit later, also about adhering to your ESG agenda as well, because for the one part, you know, you're not using paper, so therefore obviously you're saving in that way, but also you're able to look at your carbon impact if you're able to investigate what's happening with your supply chain. You know, where are you sending goods to? What's the impact globally? What's the impact to your business? So I think that answers your question. No, well, yeah, it may not entirely answer your question.
No,
you're talking about pricing.
Yes.
If I could just add to that then, and I think that it very much depends on the type of business that you are. Sometimes larger businesses, the weight of that actual cost of your implementing new technology will fall onto them, but it depends to some degree on the software provider that you're using, and maybe we'll go on to talk about different models, four-corner models, and that a little bit later. But for example, in the UK already within the NHS, we use the PEPL model. PEPL itself is free. However, the access points, which you would call points 2 and 3, that's where that charge is. And that will depend on your service provider, what that actual charge is and how they deal with that. So you would need to have a conversation with the service providers, and they would all have different ways of dealing with that cost. It might be subscription, for example.
So just to be clear, if I'm Unilever, big company, my service provider might be, you know, big technology company. If I'm Good Business Pays, my service provider might be QuickBooks. Is that right? Is that what, when you say service provider?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So if there is a charge for extra work to create the link to PEPL and other things, Unilever would pay its technology company or not, depending on whether there's a charge. Joel, over to you. If I'm a small business, is e-invoicing going to cost me more from the software accounting software perspective?
No, so if joining PEPL is sort of, aligning with the PEPL standards makes the most sense because it's interoperable, and then so different software providers can speak to each other using the same standard, and it's the same cross borders. And from a cost perspective, that is very small, minimal from our side to cover the costs of operating on PEPL per invoice. I think it's about 13p.
Okay, and so Rachel, many of the things that are sort of bubbling to the surface really are that this is a good thing, it's a great thing, it can be done, but the barriers will be more cultural, perhaps, than technology or process-based. I mean, process is part of culture, I understand, but will your consultation, and can you ever see a situation where the government approach includes an aspect of cultural change and expecting, for example, big businesses to do something to help or government to fund something?
So obviously there's a consultation that's out right now, which is asking about kind of some general themes and but general shape, assuming that we are going to continue this work once we've been through these responses and so on. I think there are obviously quite a lot more conversations that need to happen. I don't think this is an early stage consultation, so it's not the end of the conversation. And I think looking at what we've been asked to do is look at how to increase uptake. A mandate is one option, which is the sort of the very blunt instrument, and that might be the right instrument here. We haven't taken a view on that yet. But looking at other options on how you increase use of this technology and drive the behaviours you want to see is something that we continue to do. And we are again looking at what other countries have done in this space in terms of kind of making information available, providing support. There's a huge range of approaches that have been taken from some countries have taken a very much a sort of compliance focused approach, very focused on mandatory rules and regulations. In New Zealand, for example, they've taken a very different approach, which is much more about raising awareness of e-invoicing. They've provided huge amounts. They've got a very, very good government website about e-invoicing to sort of drive awareness. There are also countries that have provided financial incentives. Obviously, when we look at all of these, we have to think about, does this present value for money? Is this the right thing for us to be spending taxpayer money on, etc. So this is one of those areas where I have to retreat back to my, we don't know what we're going to do because the decisions haven't been made yet. But I think one of the things we do ask about in the consultation is actually what would be helpful. Like, what is it that's actually useful? Because we can have a lot of ideas, and often I hope they're good ideas, but at the end of the day, I'm not the person running a business day in, day out. I'm not running either a small business of 10 employees or, the accounts payable of a multinational. Other people are doing that. And so those people sharing their experiences, what are the things that excite you about this and what are the things that worry you about this, so that we can understand that and put together a regime that is actually going to support those things, tackle the challenges, is really, really helpful. And it's really helpful for us to hear now. What can happen in policy making is that you get to a point where you think you've got the final thing, you announce it, it's all very exciting, and that's when someone sticks up their hands and says, hang on, this is why it's not going to work. And the policymaker just didn't know, and that's when you get big delays. And we've heard from Joel about how challenging those can be. And so what we are trying to do here is to kind of pull things out of the woodwork now, so that we do give ourselves the best chance. And I'm sure there will still always be emerging issues to kind of deal with those things and understand them early.
And but what we do know is happening, I know there are some things we don't know the outcome of, but what we do know, I think, if I've got my facts wrong, correct me please here, is the Procurement Act that came in a couple of months ago, which is about public sector procurement, 350 billion a year, stipulates that e-invoicing must be used, I think, within public sector procurement. And the second thing that I saw at the digital accounting show a couple of weeks ago was, of course, all the things that Joel mentioned around making tax digital and having to use software from 2026, which means the current tax year, I think we're probably in at the moment, you need to pay attention to it, especially if you're an accountant. So given that we're moving fast in public sector procurement towards e-invoicing, and for private sector, everybody's going to have to put their tax returns in using software, it feels like we're headed quite fast towards an opportunity where e-invoicing is the obvious answer. And the real question that we should be asking ourselves in business is, culturally, how do we adopt and change to go with that?
I mean, I think that's a reasonable set of thoughts. Obviously, I can't comment on what we're going to have as the sort of future regime for business to business. But, you know, we do see a lot of use of e-invoicing at the moment. The NHS is one of the particular areas in public procurement where it's been in use for quite a long time. And we know this isn't new technology. You know, no one's pretending this is cutting edge tech. But I think those cultural issues, how do businesses organise and organise themselves to be in a position to take advantage of this technology, because technology and data is great if you have a sense of how you're going to use it. There's a huge range of different service providers providing very different types of services for very different businesses, which I think we would tend to see as a good thing, rather than having sort of attempting to have government provide a one size fits all. Actually having that market means that different products can develop they might be sector specific, they might be focused at different sizes of business. And I know there are quite a lot of discussions, particularly for businesses which are having to implement e-invoicing because of changes in Europe on the regulations, of actually using this to kind of have a look at their accounts payable, accounts receivable systems, and use this kind of regulatory change to really look at their efficiencies and how they can take advantage of them. And having had the privilege of being asked to speak about what the UK is doing at several events aimed at businesses, I get to sit in and hear about what the businesses are doing for themselves. And that's been incredibly helpful, because I think both in terms of kind of understanding the scale of the work involved in adopting e-invoicing, because if we were to bring in a mandate, we have to think about timelines, we have to think about notice periods. And so having a better understanding of those processes really, really helps. I think once in government, once a minister has decided what they want to do, they always want to do it as quickly as possible, which makes perfect sense. If you think something's good, why wouldn't you get on with it? And sometimes actually people need a bit of time to get ready for the change. And that's fine, so long as I can explain this is why and this is what businesses are doing. But I think there are those opportunities out there. And I think, you know, businesses looking at that is great. As government, we have a slightly different role, of course, and part of what we are always having to think about is, if we are talking about options for mandates, is that mandate worth it? Does it deliver enough benefits to be worth introducing a new set of rules? With something like e-invoicing, the other way of thinking about that question is, e-invoicing works well when lots of people are using it because it's about a network. If you make it a voluntary option, do you get enough uptake for the network to deliver the benefits without that push of a mandate? And so, you know, those are sort of the two angles on that question that we are having to ask ourselves and trying to understand at the moment, and is where I think, you know, the responses that we're getting to the consultation will be really helpful. We're into the final weeks now of the consultation, which is open until the 7th of May. We've had over 150 responses so far, which Normally in consultations, you only get any responses in the very final weeks. So that's quite a high number for now. And, you know, I think we are getting a good range, but, you know, always want to hear from people, because that's how we can put together sort of sensible advice for ministers to tackle these questions.
And, you know, maybe some of it is, what are the reasons for not doing it, right? Because, you know, you can go on forever saying, here are the reasons to do it. And it sounds like the obvious answer. Well, why didn't we just go there? It does, to me, it sounds like the obvious answer. Well, we'll just go there. But what are the reasons for not doing it? Are there any reasons, Ellen, for not doing it, do you think?
Sometimes it's simply inertia, and also what I was talking about at the beginning of the conversation. You know, people have got their heads down doing their day-to-day job. You know, they haven't necessarily got time to think about this extra thing which they don't have to think about, and to some extent as well, it's human nature. We don't do the thing until we have to do the thing, and I. You know, Rachel was just talking just now about the fact that we do have a very mature service provider community, and they will be able to help business to overcome any obstacles that they might be facing. And that's one of the reasons for setting up the UK eLab. So I'm one of the co-founders of the group, along with a couple of others, and within that community we try to get together lots of different voices so that we can you know, help the businesses to overcome, as I say, any challenges that they might have. But the one of the main reasons that we've found, and we conduct various elements of research over the years, in fact over the last 10 years at PPN, and one of the major obstacles, as I say, for not going forward with e-invoicing and further automation is people say, well, we're happy with the way things are. But just because people are happy with the way that things are doesn't mean that actually they wouldn't be happier if certain things had changed.
Brilliant. This is to show that the show is live, right? Because we've been joined by Alex, which I sometimes invite people on unexpectedly, and they think, oh goodness, he's inviting me onto the show. But there was a comment that Alex, who of course is one of the founders of the Alchemie Network, put into the chat, and I wanted us to respond to that. And that was, Alex, the question about the end of the year. You've worked in these big businesses, run procurement organizations, and the boss says what, and then what as it relates to e-invoicing. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, so it's great. I really do think we need to do something when it comes to e-invoicing, and we need to remove some of the barriers of we didn't receive it, or it was input wrong, or it went to the wrong department. If we can remove a lot of those excuses, then it's fantastic. However, there are periods in the year where large organizations sadly are bonused based on their cash generation, and decisions are often made that it doesn't matter whether you receive the invoice or not, that it's matched or not, that it's ready for payment or not, we're not paying anybody this month. So that is still a cultural issue, and it predominantly exists with the very larger organizations. And it's not that they're not doing well, it's not that they're not profitable, it's not that they're not generating cash, it's they're not going to receive a bonus if they don't hit this number. So really, bonuses shouldn't be driven on cash generation, especially if you can pull one of these levers, but they are. And that's still a cultural thing that we're going to need to get over. I'm not saying this isn't a fantastic step in the right direction, but I have had many arguments with CFOs that have said, are you going to tell everyone in the business they're not going to receive their bonus? And it's one of those where in December you just go home and turn off your phone, and it's horrible.
I mean, I think that does go back to making sure that you've got the right culture right from the top. And I do think that it does stem from the top, and you have to drive that a different culture down through the rest of the organization. Because if you are incentivized in that way, what kind of damage is that doing to the rest of your supply chain? And there's no organization which is exempt from some, you know, there's a supplier that they depend on going bust, you know, and then other suppliers thinking, well, actually, this is how they treated another supplier who they no doubt know because they're in the same industry. I'm not sure we want to do business with them too. And you only have to go back to what happened with, I know it was a while ago now, but what happened with Carillion, for example. You know, if suppliers are not paid on time, it can have a, as you will know, a knock-on domino effect. And just because you're a big business doesn't mean to say that you're immune from the impact of that. And I think that as a country, but as a certainly culture within organizations, we have to understand that we are the sum of our parts, and the sum of the parts of big business is it smaller suppliers and also the people within them. And if you're working, what kind of culture is it as well? If you are saying we're going to incentivize you, and part of that incentive is not paying that supplier who, if you're working in procurement, you actually might know them quite well. It doesn't make you feel brilliant, even if it is Christmas.
Sadly, it's something we still hear. You know, I was on a call with some construction colleagues, and one of them, I guess quite rightly, said, well, in a recession, doesn't it make sense to hold on to cash for as long as possible? So yeah, of course, there is still that view out there, which goes back to a couple of other questions that were raised, one for perhaps Rachel, and then maybe Joel will have a comment on this. But it feels like there's an opportunity to join up a few government things. I know that's not an easy thing to do, right? But you are actually doing a joint consultation with DBT, HMRC. So there's already a feeling that this is a joined up thing. Next year, all small businesses are going to have to change in terms of the way that they submit their tax stuff. Secondly, small businesses are being encouraged to bid for public sector work, which involves e-invoicing. If the consultation goes through its, you know, sort of process and comes out the other end with some recommendations, does it mean a 5 to 10 year plan? At which point, you know, if I'm still here at that point, of course, e-invoicing will arrive, or is it going to be a 1 to 2 year? Let's team it up with all the making tax digital changes, with all the things coming next, so we don't have to educate. I hate that word, but you know, sort of talk to small businesses 3 or 4 times, and it becomes like a Chinese burn of stuff coming down. It can be done in one swoop.
So I think that's one of the things that we're trying to work out. It depends a bit on what we end up doing. If you were doing a sort of here are the new standards for e-invoicing, that's probably something that's a bit quicker than here are new standards and a new mandate. Oh, and by the way, we want a data feed as well. Those things look different. The timelines don't have to be everything at once. You could have a lot of encouragement to take up e-invoicing with a new standard and a roadmap towards a mandate in however many years. And if you were looking at the data feed, which is a sort of, again, is it the right answer? Don't know. Working on it. That could follow. So it's not that it's either nothing happens for 5 to 10 years or everything happens in 2 years. I think you can create a roadmap, you can stage this.
Yeah.
We're quite mindful as well of some of the we want to be mindful of the timelines that businesses and the software sector would need in order to implement. If we announced new standards tomorrow to take effect next April, say, I'm not sure that people would be ready, because the software has to be built. If we did something very similar to existing e-invoicing systems, Joel will correct me if I'm completely wrong, we would think that's probably a little bit less work for the software industry than if we decided to do something completely different. If we were looking at a mandate, we know businesses have to go through their planning cycles. They have to bid for the finance. They have to get the engineers ready to set up their new e-invoicing system to talk to their central systems. And so I think there is a likelihood of having some sort of lag between here is the new regime and here's what the rules are, and the day that you have to comply. Otherwise, I'm not sure that people would be able to. Ministers tend to like getting things done. Often as a minister, you might not be, you're always thinking in terms of the parliament, you're always thinking in terms of, you want to leave your legacy. So I don't see a reason that ministers would want to delay. Obviously, Making Tax Digital is a massive, massive program that has been running for quite a long time and with a lot of development. And, I think it would be lovely if everything always lined up perfectly, but that's just not how it works. And we see e-invoicing as building on the foundation of MTD. And I think also do see that there is a difference in the UK context for encouraging adoption of e-invoicing, because people are already using their MTD software, which means that at the moment for VAT registered businesses, of course, they're already using it. As you say, income tax self-assessment is coming on very soon. So these are things we're looking at. Getting the balance right is really important, and also getting the detail right once we have a decision on our direction of travel is going to be quite important. So actually, there are existing standards that we could adopt. Making sure that we adopt a standard that's going to work for the UK is really important. And I think one of the things, Joel spoke about it, but I've heard from a lot of people who've got quite a lot of experience of e-invoicing rollouts internationally, is one of the real challenges is when a country announces, here's the rollout, here's the mandate, here's the standards, and then either changes it or pushes it back. And so it's really nice when you can run things in the kind of like, let's announce it, see how it goes, tweak it. I'm not sure that this is the right area to do that, which does mean you have to get things right and take that time at the beginning, which is a very long way of saying I don't know. But here are the sorts of things which influence our thinking, and I hope it's useful to hear that ramble, because I hope it just sort of draws back the curtains a bit on how that sort of policy making thinking works and the different kind of elements we're trying to juggle, and ultimately trying to help a minister make a decision on how to balance those competing concerns. And I'm always very glad that as an official, my job is to advise, not to decide. I'm very glad that the minister is there to make that final decision.
Just building on what Rachel said there. So I really like that kind of roadmap approach and doing small parts. One of the things that's really working right now on the net zero journey is the fact that there is this big, hairy, audacious goal that's set out there in 2030 and 2040 that companies have to start thinking about. And even if you don't have all of the details in the path, it might be really helpful if government said, by this date in the future, this is what it's going to look like. Exactly how we get there is unknown right now, but it will force large businesses to start thinking about it and taking it seriously, even though they don't know what it's going to look like. But if there was just that kind of message that said, by 2035, late payments will not be acceptable and there will be consequences. We don't know what those are going to look like yet, but we have to stop this culture of what is business failure. It is unacceptable behaviour. But just a thought.
Yeah, Joel, I just wanted to ask you, did you have any other thoughts for closing remarks? Because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, I think there's a given like all the work that's going on across government at the moment, there's quite a few ways of very complementary stuff going on at the same time. So obviously there's the late payments consultation that will be out coming weeks. Legislative changes that could come into play could be buttressed by e-invoicing, because then you can have the automated like policies in place. Obviously companies can go above and beyond with the fair payment code if they want to get gold, and they can set their own payment times at a different time, but at least there'll be a statutory like time for paying invoices. And then given that everyone will be moving towards e-invoicing through mandate at a future date, then it all can be aligned. And actually that's one way that you will be able to stop late payments is that combination of the technology and then the sort of the legislative policy in place. And then I think I totally agree with Rachel as well, like a phased approach. Like I think one of our jobs in sort of the provider perspective is educating our customers on it. And we've done it before with Making Tax Digital. We're more than happy to take on that burden, as long as we have like sort of the confidence in a timeline that this is going to actually take place. I think if you look at sort of our peers in Sage and Xero, we've all helped sort of HMRC with the awareness around Making Tax Digital and making sure that small businesses know the benefits to it, and then also what they need to do to comply with it as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, we've run out of time. We're 5 minutes over. I do want to thank everybody, to Ellen and Joel and Alex, but especially to Rachel. It's a tough job being the sort of government person from HMRC coming on and doing all of this. But when I talked to Rachel a few weeks ago, it was clear that they were doing a good job on creating the consultation, but there's only a couple of weeks to go, right? 7th of May, I think, is the date of closure. And a lot of people say, oh, well, it's not worth sending it in because, you know, you don't know, nobody reads it. Rachel is the person that's going to be reading your consultation. So there's a real person at the other end that is going to read your stuff. So get your views in, especially on the phases, right? The phases, and especially on the mandate, yes or no, or the cultural stuff. I'm going to close now in the interest of respecting your time. Thank you to everybody for joining today. It's been a good show. And the recording will be available and online soon. Thanks, everyone.